You've found AHO Radio. We're authentic human outliers coming together to help heal the fear of being authentic. To bring back genuine human conversation. No hype, no sensationalism, just honest talk about the critical issues affecting society, affecting humankind. And now, here are the hosts of AHO Radio, John Krotec and Bill Protzmann. Hey, Bill Protzmann here. Hey, John, are you over there, buddy?
I sure am, man. You know, me, I'm always somewhere, and I guess this is a good place to be. Here we are in the 7th week of the COVID-19 pandemic, and what a great time to start something new like AHO Radio, right?
Truly, yeah.
So we're trying something new today. Actually, this is going to be like an inaugural show for me. Bill and I have been talking about it, what floats our boats, and one of the things that does mine is poetry. And, here we are in the 21st century, and perhaps the smallest section in the bookstores these days is poetry. And there's a lot of fantastic poets out there, and people wonder, well, what is poetry, and why don't we read poetry? Or, people still read poetry. And poetry for me was a means of grasping an event that happened to me between the 3rd and 4th grades. And it was an event that literally fractured my soul. It broke my heart. Emotional state busted up into a million little pieces. And, I'm not a victim, and it's not woe is me. What I did back then was I started to create ways to come to grips with that type of an event. It was an assault, sexual assault. And of course, nobody really talks about those, not young people. A lot of people don't talk about it. And the poetry was a way for me to try to release some of that. And so what we're going to be doing with my short portion each week, and we're probably going to do it on Mondays, is offer up one poem and then talk a little bit about it. And, the poem that I'd like to do for this initial one, Bill, it's pretty hard hitting, but I want those who are listening, and I appreciate anybody listening to Bill and me, talk about authentic things. I want people to understand through this poem the gravity of the event and how it just shook my core. Of course, I didn't write this when I was, in the 3rd grade. I wrote this when I was much older, but it's called Soulless Memories. Let me see if I can get it here and just discuss this real quick. Soulless Memories, okay? Here you go. I try not to remember the finer details. I've blocked most of them out. There are some I can't forget. No matter what, drugs and alcohol, overspending cannot create amnesia. I tried to push him off. He was much bigger than me. I only remembered he passed out after he was finished with his personal fun. Was my hell. I was pinned underneath. He was foaming at the mouth. I was silent. My soul left me. That's, yeah.
Hold on a second here. I just got to breathe on this. I have never heard such a succinct description of, first of all, I'm going to clarify for anybody who happens to be listening to this. This is male on male. And
yeah.
This is a little kid and clearly an adult. You're a little kid. And I've had a family member who suffered this kind of abuse and went public about it as well. And it just rips my guts out, because this is something that's been going on probably since humankind, was new. And it's such a complete traumatic damage. I don't know how to say it in any other way. It's as close to being a holistic trauma as there possibly can be. Hits you physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah, it's called an emotional injury, is what,
Yeah, way bigger than, yeah. So first of all, thank you, John, for putting this down, in words. And thank you everybody who's made it through. There's nothing inappropriate about this in the language itself, but if you're listening and you feel this welling up inside you, whatever those emotions and feelings are, then the poem has done its job. So, John, tell us about it.
well, that's, soulless memories, they become embedded in your soul. And, the fight or flight, there was not much I could do. I'm not going to go into specifics, but the poem kind of said it all. And so you enter that day of your existence on the planet one way, and you go to sleep that night another way. And it's hard to really quantify. Anybody that's been through that, of course, traumas do not have to be childhood sexual assault. They can be anything from financial ruin to divorce, to bullying, disfigurement from an accident. So many different things affect humans. But one thing that's kind of consistent with all traumas is that they affect you at a core state, at an emotional level, which is sometimes hard to adjust to. And so, who are you going to tell, in the third grade what's going on? And of course, somehow immediately you think that it's your fault. And I got to tell you, when something like that happens to you, those of you that have experienced that, heaven forbid, is that you are never the same. And even as you grow older, you still can't forget the memory of what happened. That always lives with you. And so it doesn't get better because the emotions are still the same. And we've heard of triggers, everybody's heard of triggers, it doesn't really get better. It just gets different because you start to learn how to cope. But, the one thing with sexual assault, it's kind of a double whammy emotionally. And this is what I learned when I was going through my therapy, was that sex in and of itself is a very pleasurable act for a majority of people that engage in it. And so regardless of how it's performed, there's a certain exhilaration and a genetic embodiment of something that's good, that feels good. But at the same time, when it's done under traumatic situation, it gives you a serious mixed message. So, well, this kind of feels good, even though it's not, what you would consider right by any stretch of the imagination. And then you have the downside of it, that that's something's not right with that. And you mentioned, lineage, and we've talked about this before, ancestral traumas, traumas that are repeated one generation to the next. And obviously that person must have had that done to him, and then done to him, and done to him, and done to him. And maybe there was a female in there along the way, who knows? But that didn't just start with him and me. That's something that's been going on for a while. And that's the part that makes it even more, how would you say, substantial? Because those types of things, the buck doesn't stop until it stops with the person. And the buck stopped with me, even though the damage carried on, all through, high school, pecking order of adults and young adults and kids, and then into college, and not wanting to deal with it on a deeper level, so I dealt with it on a topical level, and, high risk behavior, and drinking, and drugs, of course, marijuana and stuff. And, all things to really mask something hurt inside. So, the damage to these things. And so what I did, I started to write about it, and I started to lose myself in not only the emotions on pen on paper, but also in movies and in books. And I was hungry for hero type and even underdog type people that had rose above, and it just became part of who I was. It became creative, and that's how I turned that angst and anger when I wasn't drinking or doing something stupid that could get me killed. I started writing.
So how long ago did you write this poem?
That poem was written in the last year.
Okay, so you've turned a corner in this last year that lets you that where you found a voice for this finally.
Right. Most of the, yes, thanks for that. Most of the poetry up until then had been like character poems, throwing myself in a character, writing a poem about somebody or a situation. But I would say in the past year, and ever since I really published the book just a couple of months ago, my first book, poetry compilation, I'm starting to now get into the real nitty gritty of the emotional state. I've written over 5,000 poems and had 125 of them published. But, and I'm looking forward to writing more. But I just, I wanted to share on this initial episode of AHO Radio why or how or who I am with that first poem, just to show the the gravity of such episodes, and how a 90-second event can literally can ruin a person's life or affect it in a negative way for many, many years after. And it's not uncommon, like mine, 42 years later after the fact, for things to come out when you finally have to deal with it. And then what I'd like to do with the poetry book is to let people know who may be suffering from something very similar, that they're not alone. And that part of the therapy or part of the way back is to sometimes discuss it and talk about it.
I completely agree. There's no better way than to bring it up, and to bring it up in terms of art is something that's pretty common too. I know a lot of musicians, being a musician, a lot of musicians are sparked to inspiration by the traumatic events in our lives, and it seems like as poets and writers and artists and musicians that our job is to go there, to find the meaning in something sometimes as poignant as our own traumatic experience, and then to offer that as a gift to other people wherever they are in their life is such a huge blessing, John, and it's also a courageous one. And by the way, if you're listening, both John and I have been participating in a workshop series with poet David White, and can I put that in the show notes? We should let them know that May is another series.
Absolutely, we should. David White, you're right. And I've actually got one that he inspired. I know that you were on the same workshop with me. I'm looking maybe share that at the next episode. It's one that David White inspired that has to do. I'll give a little clue with the blackbird and the palm.
Yeah, because it's so important to people that people have a way in. And if your way is reading, and poetry resonates with you, we'll put your book, John, in the show notes so people can find Fractals. It's a great book. I mean, it's one of those things you can read it in quickly, but to actually let it work on you, to let it go inside and unlock the stuff that's important to unlock with you, that can take a lifetime. And I'm still going back to poems. Like David said in his workshop, he's going back to Yeats and Wordsworth. This is old poetry, but it still speaks to us today. And John, you're part of the voice now.
Well, thank you for that, and I appreciate the support, and and everybody listening. And you're right, poetry. It's amazing how, if you take the time to read poetry, how you can find something of significance and something that parallels your own life. And you're right, you can read a poem that's 500 years old, and you can still feel something human there. With Fractals, I call it the poetic journey for acceptance. It's trying to put all the pieces together, and it's been amazing, Bill, to see all of the responses and comments about the book, on Amazon, how it did touch people. And my whole hope is to just touch one person a day with a poem. So thank you for listening to this episode, this inaugural episode. And thanks, Bill, for being my co-host on AHO Radio. And, pick up a book of poetry. Next time you're at the bookstore, go online, do some poetry research, and put some poetry back in your life. It will definitely make it better.
John, thank you so much, everybody. That's John Krotec, poet, veteran, entrepreneur, and friend. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, buddy. AHO.
AHO. Thank you for joining us on this episode of AHO Radio. Information we mentioned is probably in the show notes, but if we missed anything, please let us know and we'll get it added for you. Subscribe to the AHO Radio channel on YouTube to stay connected, and, as always, we wish you health, success, and significance. AHO!